Hi everyone, and welcome to Southasiasphere, Southasian's monthly roundup of news events and developing stories across South Asia. I'm Raisa, and I'm joined by my colleagues Shubhanga, Marlon, and Shweta. Hi guys.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi.
So our big story in this edition is on targeting and intimidation of the South Asian press, especially in Pakistan, Bangladesh, and Myanmar. And in Around Southasia in 5 minutes, we'll be talking about a currency swap between Sri Lanka and Bangladesh, China's land grab in Bhutan, and stories of environmental exploitation in Nepal and Sri Lanka. Let's begin by talking about recent attacks on the press.
Yes, Raisa. And this is quite a worrying trend from the region. Now, we've been speaking about this quite a bit among ourselves, and we all agree that this is not something new. Nevertheless, it's alarming how normalized intimidations, arrests, attacks on the press have become. So, starting with Rosina Islam from Bangladesh, who works for the daily newspaper Protomalo. Now, she was arrested on May 17th when she went to attend a meeting at the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare, where the officials, they held her for more than 5 hours and accused her of taking pictures of official documents containing sensitive information. Now, while she was being held, she was denied access to a doctor, even though she felt unwell and fainted.
Yeah, it's quite a concerning case, Marlon. And I heard she was released on bail?
Yes, she was granted bail on the 23rd, and her hearing is scheduled for 15th of July. Now, there have been quite a bit of backlash from within Bangladesh. News outlets have condemned the arrest, and there were widespread protests organized by journalist unions and advocacy groups within the country.
Yeah, and what I found interesting about this case is also that in contrast to, say, the arrest of photojournalist Shahidul Alam in 2018, there was a much more rapid and extensive mobilization from within the fraternity of journalists and within the country also. And probably I think has something to do with the fact that this was a reporter working for a mainstream newspaper.
Yeah.
What she was doing was seen largely as a kind of non-political thing, as a story on governance or bad governance, and it probably helped that mobilizing these various journalist groups and federations also have some kind of leverage with the government. Certainly much more than an individual photojournalist or activist would have.
And there was a similar situation recently with the Pakistani journalist Asad Ali Turf, known for his critical coverage of the country's military on his YouTube channel. He was attacked last week inside his own home by 3 men who questioned him on his sources of income and funding.
Yeah, and this was in response to a complaint that he defamed an institution of government of Pakistan on social media. Now, this is according to the summons. But it does not specify the social media post in question or the government institution that was defamed. Further, it warns that he could face criminal prosecution if he does not comply.
Yeah, and I think one problem with these attacks is also it's never exactly clear who's behind these attacks. In case of Asatur, what is clear is that his journalism was not popular among the Pakistani establishment, especially the military. And he has this quite popular YouTube channel where he posts stories and blogs, and recently did a story about this questionable promotion of a bureaucrat who also happens to be a brother of the ISI chief. So that many people assume is what got him into trouble. Of course, there have been other worrying developments also, including one very prominent TV journalist, Hamid Mir, losing his primetime TV spot. Hamid Mir is quite prominent. He in the past has actually been shot at also, and came back to journalism, and now has been actually taken off his show by his employers, Geo Jung Group, for making a speech during a rally that was in support of Asatur. And the reason they give for taking this decision is that he made some unseemly remarks during the speech. Now, during one part of the speech, he talks about how journalists, have this embarrassing information about private lives of army generals in Pakistan. He doesn't mention them, but that's clearly implied. And the fact that, if they can come into our homes and kind of go after us and assault us, then we also have the ability to make public certain embarrassing information. So that seems to be what the employer found problematic, and therefore took him off the show. And but I think there's been some more recent troubling events also, right?
Yeah, so more recently, along the same kind of lines, another journalist and anchor, Asma Shirazi, who's also kind of been subject to attacks in the past, and the organization that she's affiliated with, Freedom Network, was attacked by a so-called investigative journalist for being an Indian operation, which was based on a misleading reading of the public domain information about Freedom Network's website. This case is particularly troubling because it was someone who, the person who exposed this identifies himself as a journalist and, uses and even co-opts the language of investigative journalism, but does so disingenuously because apparently this investigative journalist didn't realize or doesn't know that website hosting companies have servers in different countries around the world.
And over in Myanmar, on the 24th of May, Frontier Myanmar's managing editor Danny Fenster was detained at Yangon International Airport while he was waiting to board a flight to Kuala Lumpur. In a statement by Frontier Myanmar, they stated that they have not been able to confirm with the authorities why he has been detained or what charges he is facing. And according to AAPPB, the latest update from the 21st of May, almost 88 journalists have been arrested since the February 1st coup.
Yeah, that's quite a worrying statistic. And interestingly, whilst the news of Danny Fenster's detention broke, there was also a news story of a former Frontier Myanmar journalist, Mrat Kyaw Thu, who fled the country, and he was stranded at the Frankfurt airport after trying to seek asylum in Germany. He was eventually redirected to Spain because of an EU law, because he had a Schengen visa there, even though he already had 2 job offers in Germany. And that incident has also led to some discussion about how EU procedures relating to politically persecuted individuals should allow or recognize existing support networks.
Again, like Marlon mentioned at the beginning, these are not surprising new developments and, in a way, continuation of a trend we've been seeing for some years now. What might be worth noting is the incredible ease with which, critical journalists can be attacked like this, and not just by governments, but, also by other private actors, including fellow journalists or so-called journalists and others in the larger kind of public sphere or civil society, and often with so little engagement with the substance of their work. And also, I think really worrying is the frequency with which, these conspiratorial accusations of being an Indian agent or Pakistani agent or, increasingly maybe now Chinese agent or American agent. I think these things will unfortunately become a bit more common now. Shall we move on to our next segment, Around Southasia in 5 minutes?
Sure. So on June 2nd, the Singapore-flagged vessel Express Pearl sank off the coast of Sri Lanka, raising concerns of an oil spill after an attempt to tow it out into deeper waters failed. Now, the chairman of Master Divers, which is a specialist in towing operations, has already said that the ship sinking was entirely due to government negligence, adding that they had not been consulted and that the ship could have actually been salvaged. Now, the crew discovered an acid leak, which was possibly due to poor packaging while they were still out in the Arabian Sea, and this happened as far back as 3 weeks before the fire broke out. But unfortunately, both India and Qatar said that they had no manpower or equipment or the expertise to safely unload and handle this leaking container. Now, meanwhile, it's been revealed in court that the local agent for the Express Pearl deleted an email from the ship's captain about the leak and asked Colombo Harbour to admit the ship as it was in a dangerous and unsafe condition. Our former editor, Aunahita Mojumdar, raised the question of, what international laws govern a disaster at sea? And as far as we can tell, there's several laws that can apply, which include the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, the 1973 International Convention for the Prevention of Pollution from Ships, or MARPOL for short, the International Maritime Dangerous Goods Code, which governs the coverage of dangerous goods in package form, and there's a host of other laws and conventions for oil spills specifically. Now, in the event that there's a collision or another incident of navigation, it is usually the country whose flag the ship is bearing, or else, the country that the captain is from, which bears legal responsibility. In general, it's the polluter who pays. But it also appears that if the ship is out in international waters, then maritime law applies unless the ship is close to a particular territory or state. So the state minister on this subject, Kanchana Wijesekara, actually noted on a Twitter space that while maritime law states that ports do have to render assistance when there's a disaster unfolding, they, in situations where they have no expertise or they're unable to render assistance, which appears to have been the case here, then it's more of a gray area. Now, the impact of the ship sinking has already been termed an environmental disaster for Sri Lanka, with wide-ranging impacts that may last for years to come. So, around 5,600 fishing boats have been affected because fishing has been suspended along an 80-kilometer stretch, and tons of plastic nurdles, which are little plastic pellets used in creating other plastic items, have been washing up on Sri Lanka's beaches, raising concerns that marine species will ingest them. People have also been asked not to handle the nurdles as they may be covered in chemicals. So we do know the ship was carrying nitric acid and a host of other chemicals as well as cosmetics.
So environmental news have also made headlines in Nepal this past week after the recently announced government budget basically lifted ban on extraction of gravel, sand, stone, and other aggregates from the country. Now, the argument is that this was part of an effort to reduce Nepal's growing trade deficit, and the intended kind of buyer is companies in India, for example. But this has raised a lot of questions about the kind of environmental damage this kind of extraction can do and has already done. Particularly in this hill range that runs from east to west called the Chure Hill Range. And over the past decade and a half, there's been a lot of reporting on it, on how unregulated extraction of these things, these aggregates, partly because of kind of growing infrastructure projects and construction projects within the country, but also because there's a lot of demand for these things across the border in South in India. So there's been a wide public outcry against this because this seems like a terrible way to manage an economic problem, and the media, the civil society, a lot of environmentalists, and I think general public has been quite critical of this new measure. But it remains to be seen how exactly the government will respond to this in the coming days.
Over in Bhutan, an article published in the magazine Foreign Policy in early May states that China has built an entire town with roads, a power plant, a communications base, military and police outposts, and a warehouse almost 8 kilometers into the territory of Bhutan. Now, China and Bhutan, they share a border that extends to more than 450 kilometers.
And over in Bangladesh, Bangladesh's central bank has in principle approved a $200 million currency swap agreement with Sri Lanka to help the country tide over its foreign exchange crisis and looming debt repayment schedule. Now, this is a significant move because this is the first time that Bangladesh is extending financial assistance to another country. And Bangladesh has outpaced both India and Pakistan in terms of GDP per capita, with Bangladesh's economy expected to grow by 6.8% in 2021. And now it's time for our culture section, Bookmarked.
So there's been a lot of discussion in the Indian press and social media last few weeks about the fate of India's National Archives based in New Delhi, after it became clear that part of the structure that holds some of these archival records were to be demolished as part of the ongoing Central Vista project. Now, this Central Vista project is this massive redevelopment project in India's central administrative area, and so it seemed as if an annex would come down, and it held national archival records. So many scholars and researchers, especially historians, have been quite concerned about this, and especially because there isn't a lot of clarity about what happens to the records, about the relocation plans. Now it seems the actual structure that exists right now will not be demolished because it is a heritage building, but the records will be moved. And the worry is about how this relocation of these massive amounts of records will take place, and if this will also entail a shift in accessibility of the records in the future. I mean, that's one of the big concerns also. It's important to also remember that with all the caveats about state archives and their limits, these are also important records of not just the Indian nation state, but also because of the nature of the colonial government, records of large parts of South Asia. And similarly, an interesting thing we came across on, speaking of archives, is this visual documentation of Nepal's queer movement called We Are Queer visual project. We'll also put a link to that in the on our website.
And it's interesting that you bring up archives, because this week, starting on 7th June, marks the beginning of International Archives Week, and it's also been 40 years since the burning of the Jaffna Library on May 31st, 1981. This was one of the largest in Asia, when 95,000 volumes, some of which were rare and centuries old, were destroyed. So my recommendation this month would be an article from our own archives, which is Sundar Ganeshan's essay from 2014 on the fall and resurrection of the Jaffna Library. In this essay, he essentially notes that while it's important to recover all that was lost, there's still much work to be done in restoring and rebuilding the Jaffna Public Library.
Interesting. And I ended up watching this 2019 movie, Ib Aleu, which is centered around the story of a migrant worker, Anjani, whose job is to shoo away monkeys in Lutyens, Delhi. So the movie I found, which was on Netflix, it was full of social satire and commentary about the nature of contract labor. And it made several kind of very subtle statements on class and about the imbalance of power between supervisors and employees, which was then kind of passed down the chain of employment. And it kind of just highlighted the invisible work of migrant workers.
Yeah, I watched it over the weekend too. And to be honest, it was quite traumatic, at least to me. It brought up a lot of repressed memories. I don't know about you guys, but I've had some close encounters with monkeys. They are ferocious. And one of my friends used to say, he had this like really nice statement about monkeys. He called them monkeys are the cockroaches of the mammalian world. But yeah, getting back to the movie, I agree with what you said, Raisa. Class is definitely at the core of the movie, and I liked the movie, and I felt it brought up a lot of pertinent issues, but it felt like something was missing. Apart from Anjani, the other characters I felt were not fully developed. Like the character of the sister, the character of the brother-in-law, and Kumud, Anjani's love interest. Their struggles were introduced, but they were not like developed further. Sometimes they even felt like props, who were there to kind of amplify Anjani's character. Acting, I found to be like superb.
Yeah, I agree. Actually, when you said that, I kind of agree that there are some characters who could have been fleshed out a little more. I think one of my favorite maybe favorite isn't the right word, but I think the scene that to me kind of captured a lot of what the themes in the movie were about was this kind of party that Anjani and his friend Mahinder were invited to, and they kind of had to chase away monkeys from there, even though there were no monkeys. And it's this performance, even they themselves know that it's absurd, but they, enthusiastically carry out their job because they know that they're going to get paid at the end. And that kind of highlighted a lot of the tensions and like the core message of the movie for me. What were you guys' what were your favorite scenes?
The most interesting scene for me would be the one where Anjani is trapped by his fellow workers in a cage meant for monkeys, and they're mocking him, which I thought was a neat metaphor on kind of like exploitation of labor, and where kind of these humans are holding this other human captive, and it's almost dehumanizing, which is something we saw with the recent migrant crisis, for example.
Yeah, and I like the scene with the brother-in-law who works as a security guard. How he brings home this his newly assigned gun, after his night shift, and it's quite absurd. It's because it's early morning and he's trying to hide this heavy and long gun from people and kids. And there's one point where he's in front of the train tracks, and he's trying to manage his gun, his bike, his scarf, for like 2 minutes. So I felt that was very kind of an absurdist scene that captures, I think, the overall absurdism and satire of the movie. But what do you guys think about the ending? It felt a little abrupt, right?
Yeah, I guess it was a bit sudden. It was also quite surreal, it just suddenly cut to this very surreal kind of scene. But it also reminded me that it was, I guess, kind of touching on Anjani's need to escape, like escapism, and also highlighting that he had some skills that weren't appreciated in the job that he was currently in. He had this kind of creative, kind of performative spirit, which is captured in that final scene.
And dancing. Clearly.
Yeah, exactly. These are things that would have been appreciated if he were kind of not a contract laborer or migrant worker, but it was him escaping, but also I felt showcasing his skills. So I liked it, but it was quite abrupt and a bit surreal, I guess.
No, I agree completely. His creativity, he has all these different approaches to chasing away the monkeys. And which I think is quite underappreciated.
Yeah.
In his job. By the way, out of curiosity, did you guys try out the sounds?
I don't know. I don't think that I could replicate that like Mahinder's tone. I was quite impressed by the way they were.
Yeah, that was like pretty nice. Yeah, and. I think we should spare our listeners. You guys can check it out on YouTube. But it's fascinating, right? I think next time I encounter a monkey, I'm going to try it out and see if it works.
Will it work on other animals and birds? That's the question.
Only monkeys.
Worth a try. There's only one.
You haven't seen the film.
So there's only one way to find out, I guess. We just have to encounter some kind of wildlife.
And plus, I think Shubhanga needs to, if you want to be part of this discussion, you need to watch the film or watch our recommendation.
I need to watch beyond more than just the trailer.
Anyway, on that note, that's it for this edition of Southasiasphere. Do head to our website, himalmag.com, to see the cartoons illustrating this episode by Gihan Dichikera. And while you're at it, check out our membership plans and support our work. Thanks, everyone. Bye.
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 For more Himal podcasts, go to himalmag.com/podcasts.